Okay, so thank you everybody for joining the group 3. This group my name is Chisa Umemiya. I work at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and I'm leading this group 3. The topic of us is about the effectiveness of transparency-related capacity building actions. And we have now only half an hour. Originally, the plan was for 1 hour, so we have to really focus on discussion, and I hope you can collaborate with us. And before going to the questions, I just would like to give you a brief background of who we are, the participants that I could see at the registration list. Because it's very important to know who we are, because the methodology for effectiveness, measuring effectiveness really depend on the purpose of doing so. It's important to know who we are. We are at least at the registration stage, we were around 40 people registered for this group coming from 26 countries. And we are the combination of those who design, implement, engage with individual transparency capacity building actions. But also we have the people who are not necessarily involved in each capacity building action, but still have influence on this capacity building. For example, through negotiations and DC planning, or through managing capacity building programs or funds. So obviously the different people have different purpose of doing the measuring effectiveness, and I'd like to keep all of us in mind when we discuss this topic. And the second point I want to emphasize about this group is that we have different thematic background, meaning that we have people coming from field of adaptation, mitigation, GHG inventories, and support. So once again, depending on the context, the approaches for measuring effectiveness will be different. Now I'd like to move to questions that we want to address in this group. And you must have received a list of guiding questions from the Secretariat. There are 3, but I would like just to squeeze them into 2, because to me, these 3 questions have really our essence in 2 ways. One is about methodologies. How can we assess the effectiveness of the capacity building actions? The question is how. And then second question is about making use of the results of the assessment. Based on measuring effectiveness, how can we ensure needs and support are matching? And I'd like to spend our equal half of time, if possible, between the 2 questions, but probably we'll spend more time on methodology. When I ask you questions, you can raise the hands up function, and then I think we can point up your name one by one and by the order of appearing that hands up button. And it would be great if you can shortly introduce your name and what do you do in relation to this topic very quickly when you answer the question. And for the first question is about the methodology. Our question is that, is there any existing methodology available for us to measure the effectiveness? And for that, Alejandro, could you share this slide? Thank you. So the question is about whether we know any existing methodology for measuring effectiveness. And for this one, I actually would like to introduce one methodology sort of to start up breaking the ice of a discussion. This is a methodology that I recently used under a project called the Assessing the Greenhouse Gas Inventory Capacity in Developing Countries. This is a project funded by the Global Support Program of the UNDP, and I, together with some colleagues from the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute, recently implemented in order to understand the progress made in building capacity in developing countries across the world for greenhouse gas inventories. And for this study, I have used a methodology using a set of country-level, macro-level indicators. And as you can see it on a screen here, we disaggregated what we think as representing national GHG inventory capacity into dimension, criteria, and a set of corresponding indicators that we can measure. And this slide is only covering a part of the entire list that we developed due to the limited space of the slide. And from this experience, that's quickly 2 things I wanted to share. And then when I also would like to hear your experience with this type or other methodology later on, one lesson that I had is that key of this kind of macro level indicator is really how we come to agreement on what we think constituting GHG inventory capacity. This is information about the criteria that you can see in the middle of this slide. This methodology, because it depends on this macro level, country level like indicators, it all depends on our understanding and perspectives on how we think GHG inventory capacity is built based on our experience. And for this task, we went through deep consultation with external experts as much as possible to make sure those who involve in transparency capacity building can agree with the list of criteria we developed from organizations like CEEW, GIZ, JICA, and many others. So one lesson from this kind of methodology approach is very important to come to agreement on what constitutes GHG inventory capacity. And for GHG inventory, I believe it is a lucky one because we already have a long experience of doing it. But I wonder in case of, for example, adaptation or support or tracking progress of NDC implementation where needs were indicated as high from the previous speaker, I wonder if we would have another challenge of doing this kind of methodology. And second lesson I had is that even if we could come out with a good list of criteria, our data availability for corresponding indicators really was an issue. For example, please look at the right bottom of this slide. We agree that technical skills of individual really affect national level GHG inventory capacity. And that skill should include adequate understanding of IPCC inventory methodologies. Clear. But to represent this criteria, we use data on the number of nominated experts to the UNFCCC who basically serves for ICA and then other review work. But we additionally wanted to include the level of data on the level of access to capacity building program by each country. Because external experts for this research project mentioned, it's very important to have that data to indicate the level of technical skills. But unfortunately, there is no such data available at this moment that is collected in a consistent manner across countries, even though we have a long period of experience providing support to developing countries. So that is the second lesson that I learned. It is important to have a good research methodology, but at the same time, data issues are always there. So that is a very quick introduction of one methodology as an example, and I hope it could sort of inspire you to think about your own experience. So my question to you all is that, do you know any methodology for assessing our effectiveness, which could be in any thematic area? So are you open to push the hands up button if you have anything to share? Yes, I see Sumit. Sumit, you can unmute yourself.
Or if you have audio problems, you can use the chat to put your question or comment. Sumit is writing his intervention, so maybe I could start reading it. Chisa, if you're fine.
Sure.
So at CEEW, which is Sumit's institution, they have developed a capacity building assessment matrix, which can help ascertain, one, the national baseline of the capacity that exists related to transparency of climate change reporting. Second, it can ascertain the capacity needs that have been expressed and supported internationally. And thirdly, the capacity needs that have not been identified nor addressed. So those are the experiences at Sumit's institution. They have developed about 500 indicators. So based on CG guidelines.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to ask Sumit back the question to you is that you mentioned 500 indicators. That sounds so many. And isn't that expensive to do that assessment? I mean, is it quick enough to see the results and make sure it fit into our capacity building actions that follows? Perhaps while waiting for Sumit's answering my question, whether his matrix and approach can be applicable to all, because it just, I got a quick impression that, well, 500 indicator, that's so many, although it can have been able to capture detailed information. So I think what I presented as a methodology example earlier, and also what Sumit mentioned, and if I understood his explanation correctly, I think those are the methodology to understand the current status and identifying the gap. And when it comes to measuring effectiveness, there is also a question of how each individual capacity building action make any changes on capacity being built. So I think that is a big difference, that when we talk about the methodology, one main group is to understand the status. And then the other one is to understand this, how specific our capacity building action or intervention actually made influence. So I wonder if anyone else, once again, you are open to this question, have seen or probably not limited to climate change, are about this measuring effectiveness of each individual capacity building actions. Please share your experience. Palai, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do kind of agree that, I mean, discussing methodology, I think you tend to think of more technical issues, and you're trying to think of a framework or some concrete methodology like you presented for the greenhouse gases. But I think that being said as well, at the Adaptation Fund, we have a framework for how we measure progress of our capacity building program, which is the readiness program, and this of course includes indicators and things like that and outputs. But I think the one thing we have noticed in coming up with that is it's a little bit difficult to try and focus on numerical output, quantitative analysis and quantitative data when you want to present capacity building. And a lot of the times, the things that you're measuring, at times you cannot necessarily quantify. So it tends to be a more qualitative analysis and qualitative methodology following that approach into measuring capacity building. But also this is kind of affected by the time frame. Capacity building tends to be a long-term process, and trying to evaluate, so if, for example, in a year, to kind of evaluate whether you've actually built capacity can be a bit challenging, because within that 1 year, there are many things that could happen. For example, the people you delivered that capacity to might have left that position and are somewhere else, no longer working for that government department, shifted around, and many other factors that affect how accurate you can measure the extent of capacity building. And this is probably at the individual level, which also goes in turn to affect the institutional level as well. But I just wanted to say that, we had looked at what other organizations are doing, and it's very interesting that I just want to flag this, maybe if you can take it as a methodology by the Center for Affordable Water and Sanitation Technology, which is based in Canada. And what they did in terms of how they were measuring their capacity building, for water, sanitation, and hygiene in that sector, is they essentially did research, and which is what I gather kind of the point where we are, and tried to find out what other organizations in the sector are doing in terms of measuring their own capacity building activities and initiatives. So they had surveys. They asked, how are you measuring your capacity building? And from that, they came up with their own draft methodology. And in their methodology, they identified their evaluation process based on 4 categories. And the first one was, well, they realized that, capacity building is more than just imparting knowledge. So you do training and you say, yes, people have enhanced knowledge, but beyond that is how those individuals and institutions apply that knowledge to their own situation scenarios and in country. So the 4 categories they came up with in terms of their evaluation process and their methodology, the first one was looking at reaction, how well the participants liked the education training activities, how well they responded to the capacity building being delivered in the methodology. And also in terms of learning, they looked at what knowledge, skills, and attitudes the participants retained. This is one of the things they were measuring as well. The other thing they were measuring is behavior and what the participants were doing differently once they returned to their home countries and were working in their own projects and scenarios. And the last thing they looked at was results and what overall change happened either in the community or within the institution in terms of how it interacts and it imparts the knowledge that it gained itself. So I just wanted to at least flag that and share that with you, that it is, I agree, kind of a complex process that needs comprehensive consultation and looking at all other stakeholders and what they're doing and trying, I guess, in the context of ETF, trying to find a middle ground and something that fits the objectives of ETF. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Falai, for sharing the experience. Your own work at the Adaptation Fund, that I fully agree that the numeric output only is not enough to answer all the questions that we want to find out. And also, I find it's quite interesting about our experience in Canada. They do really detailed our surveys on how people actually change their behavior after the program has occurred. And I think, as far as I am aware of, in the context of the ETF, no one really has done such, survey on the ground at the level of the project or community are doing this type of work. And that's, I wanted to comment. I think that's something that I think one way to go forward if we want to complement more the quantitative analysis that is out there now with the qualitative analysis. Okay, so maybe because we have only 10 minutes to go, so perhaps I will move to the second question. But it's related to, I think, what the Falahi shared. The second question is really how do we learn from this result of measuring effectiveness? We measure effectiveness and then definitely we have to make use of that result. So I just wanted to ask maybe to all of you once again, to the second and perhaps the last question for this group is that what sort of mechanism, perhaps if I can put in my own way, what sort of mechanism do you think are effective to inform those who play a key role in capacity building, those who make decisions and also but implementing capacity building activities, often are named practitioners, about the results of measuring effectiveness? What kind of mechanism do you think would be useful?
Chisa, we have in the chat 2 colleagues that have provided their comments, but I don't know if they want to express them and if they have the audio capacities. We have Michael Gillenwater and Feli Tusime. So, but they have included something in the chat, but if should they want to intervene, maybe they're free to do so.
Hi, this is Michael Gillenwater from GHG Management Institute. In terms of back on the question of methodology, we're now getting to where a number of countries have been doing or been working with partners to do kind of deeper, broader MRV system assessments through various projects, looking at the not just inventory, but broader transparency systems and all the institutional arrangements around that, which I know Chisa is that the issues, the existing research you've been doing has already looked at. But these assessments are able to kind of do a more focused case study because they're just looking at one country. There may become a time soon where there's enough of them out there that they could be a new data source themselves, because they've essentially, they're all individual kind of deep case studies. Now the problem is there's no standardized approach for doing those assessments, so there are varying detail and quality and for kind of ways of analysis. But it still could be a data source, and could be a way of kind of synthesizing them together into a I won't want to say a new set of indicators, but maybe a deeper set of indicators that can draw on more focused investigations, because they're going country by country, not report by report. So they're actually going into the country. So that was just one idea. The idea, and ultimately the idea being that you could imagine a process where the reviews that are eventually going to be done in the BTRs and process and whatnot, including within that an element of looking at the capacities, gathering some sort of indicators on capacity while those reviews are ongoing, and then eventually over time developing a time series of capacity change, which is one of the big things lacking right now, is they're just seeing the change over time. That's all.
Thank you, Michael. I also see Oslo from GIZ. The floor is yours.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Kirsten Oslog for GIZ Thailand. I worked before with different partnerships and projects, for example, Information Matters, which supported different countries for the establishment for BOR. And I would like to try to answer a little bit your second question, if this is okay. I'm not sure which questions we are right now working on.
How to inform our decision makers and practitioners about the results of measuring effectiveness for their next capacity building actions. What sort of mechanism do you think would be useful to have for all of us?
That's I think your last point already mentioned, like, my approach, which is like a little bit, and it's unfortunately not a straightforward answer. It's like there's no one size fits all approach, especially like for the MIB, as all the countries have, and thanks to the enhanced transparency framework, a lot of flexibility regarding to implement the ETF. One approach could be to measure like the outcome, like how many climate reports have been published. But they already, Damiano mentioned in the intervention that there with the biennial update reports, there's already kind of a non-enthusiastic by countries to submit these reports, because also on the other side, it's in the end also a political question. So not only the technical question, and this is I think also we as GIZ, as one of the supporting organizations for countries, we are trying to make reports and the transparency more attractive for political decision makers and get a high political income. And this is quite a challenge. And because like in the end, the goal could be, okay, we have reports. And then the next step would be, okay, we have high quality reports. But this is like a long way to go. And I also would like to thank you for the methodology with the different indicators, because like right now we as GIZ, we have the approach to customize and tailor-made our support to the countries as much as possible, which in the end means we have like huge varieties of approaches to support the countries. And depending on the capacities, depending on the flexibilities, and also what Michael mentioned regarding to make a survey would be also helpful. But I'm very, very curious also by the other experience regarding, because it seems like there's not like right now an established measurement system in place to measure the impact of our, like from us as a GIZ, our support. in an elaborated way, which can be used for all countries to have an effective impact on the ETF. So therefore, it's coming to your question. As I said, I unfortunately have not a straightforward answer to your question, but to have a common goal, of course, with the political decision makers is the most important one, and have the high political income buy-in for these to write the reports. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of money which goes into it. And maybe I would like to raise into your indicators regarding the institutional structure and also the country context, to add the institutional memory, because this was also mentioned by one of the colleagues that in our work, we have people in the government entities who are changing positions, who are moving, who are doing a career, or also go out of the government. So the institutional memory is, from my point of view, mostly lacking, especially when it comes to the enhanced transparency framework, including the NDC implementation, including the tracking of progress. And therefore, I think this would be quite helpful to see how we can measure this, for example, institutional memory.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your experience. So thank you very much for everyone to join in the group 3. It was a very short discussion for a difficult topic, but at least I could hear our different views and experience on this topic. And I would like to ask the Secretariat to really to continue this dialogue, sharing experience on this topic, because it seems a lot of areas to explore further. So thank you very much for joining the group 3, and you are welcome to go back to the main session in a few minutes.